Let's get this show on the road. Wherever you are, get in your car and come on down, enjoy a show. If it's your first time, well, jump on in. By the end of this drive, you'll be a Shavian. No, let's get this show on the road.
All right, welcome back to part 2 of An Afternoon with Stephen Fry. If you didn't listen to the first part and you're just finding us now, go back into your feed, find that first part, listen to that, and then come back here when you've finished. Enjoy.
There you are.
So, Stephen.
Timberley.
Royal family stories.
Well, I was lucky enough to know a man called Martin Gilliat, who was the Queen Mother's private secretary. Martin Gilliat was an extraordinary figure. He was about 6'7", huge white eyebrows. I've just accidentally called Siri. I don't know what word was similar, I just heard Siri. And he liked me because he invested in a show called Me and My Girl, a musical that I'd written the book of, and he was very kind, which of course played here. And he made some money out of it, and he would occasionally invite me to his club. And on one occasion, he asked if we could have lunch, but could I bring my friend Rowan Atkinson? Because he had something he'd like to put to us. So one thing you should know about Martin, he's a very unusual man, was that he never slept. He literally never slept. He'd been a prisoner of war many times in the Second World War and had been apparently tortured by the Gestapo and ended up at Colditz. And the result of the torture and so on meant that he just didn't sleep. When he got back to England and began royal service, doctors asked if they could study him, and he went to a sleep centre and everything. He got very bored with their attention. They decided that he had micro-sleeps through the day, tiny ones, which are enough to keep him, because he was full of energy and bounce. Anyway, he invited us to lunch. He had a very loud, booming voice, which a lot of very upper-class people have in England. I remember I have a flat in St James's, and it's opposite an old barber's shop, and a lot of the courtiers have their hair cut there, and I'm often woken up. No, the traffic wasn't bad! You know, they just absolutely yell. It's quite extraordinary. And he's a bit like that.
I may have a job for them.
And this club, Bucks, we were there in the dining room, lots of old gentlemen eating and sucking down their soup with napkins tucked in their top. And he said to me and Rowan, he said, now, do you know the Dowager Duchess of Abercorn? We said we didn't have the honour of knowing Her Grace the Dowager. Oh, well, she's been the lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth. They always called the Queen Mother Queen Elizabeth, as opposed to the Queen, who was the Queen. Her mother was Queen Elizabeth. So, and Queen Elizabeth wants to throw a party for her. She wondered if there could be some entertainment for the younger people there, because her grandchildren will be there. And so I hit on you two. Could you provide some comedy, perhaps? Now, as it happened, Rowan and I occasionally used to go off to the Middle East on what Rowan called a bank raid, which was to do comedy in the hotels where the expats in the oil business are, in Muscat and Oman and Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and so on. And we would just go to the hotels and do shows for ridiculous amounts of money. And so we had a show, as it were. But Rowan is very sort of precise and ordered. And some of you may have to put your fingers in your ears here, but it's very English upper class, this, and I rather love it in the middle of a club, at the top of his voice. Because Rowan said, well, some of our material is, well, I mean, it's not blue. Oh, it's a bit fast, is it? A bit adult, is it? And Rowan said, well, yes, yes. He said, oh, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, the royal family, I mean, they love the lavatory. I mean, so, you know, anything like that. I mean, obviously not your fucks or your cunts. Rowan disappeared into himself. But anyway, he told me a story, Martin. One day the Queen Mother said to him, Martin, I think our television's on the blink, the one in the drawing room upstairs. And this was at Clarence House, and he went upstairs and looked at the television. This was some time ago, one of those old televisions, and I gave it a bang on the side. It had that thing where it rolled up and down, you know, they do that. And I banged it and I banged it again. It didn't seem to work. So I went back down and said, ma'am, you're absolutely right. You've got a luncheon. During luncheon, I'll call those nice people at Harrods, and they can deliver a new television for you. And she said, oh, thank you, that's very kind of you, Martin. So they delivered the television, and she came upstairs with her drink after lunch to watch the 3:30 from, Ascot. And I showed her the television and said, there, look, ma'am. She said, oh, it's jolly big, isn't it? I said, yes, ma'am, and more than that, look at that. There are no dials or switches on it, can you see? Oh, no, they've forgotten the dials and switches. No, ma'am, no. You see this little grey object on the side table there next to your gin and Dubonnet? Well, that's called a remote control. Remote control? I said, yes. Now, if you'd watch, you see, when I press 1, it's BBC 1, you see? Now I press 2, it's BBC 2. When I press 3, it's ITV. In those days, those were the only channels. So isn't that clever? She said, oh, yes, it's very clever. I still think it's easier to ring. Isn't it wonderful?
So
I'll give you one more, which was she lived. Her favourite place was the Castle of Maine, a castle she bought herself at the very top of Scotland. Martin would often be used as her, the man, as it were, because her husband, obviously George VI, had died many decades earlier. And so he would be the head of the table, and she would have her guests. And the royal family are pretty formal. They dine in dinner jackets and, tuxedos, as Americans say. Until very recently, the women would leave the dining table to go into the drawing room, and the men would gather down one end to cigars and port, and then join the ladies for coffee in the drawing room afterwards. And my mother explained to me why this happened, because when I was a boy, this is what my parents did at dinner parties too, and I always found it very puzzling. And she said, well, no, darling, what it is Victorian women didn't like to say, I'm going upstairs, or I'm going to the bathroom, or revealing that they had bladders. So it's a chance for the women to leave the dining room, go to the bathroom, sort themselves out, go back down into the drawing room, and the men know that, really. And they leave enough time, and then when they go in, the women are already in the drawing room. That's the reason there is that tradition, which I thought was an interesting explanation, but that's a by the by. Anyway, on this occasion in the Castle of Maine, there's some guests, and Martin is at one end, and the Queen rises, and all the men stand, and the women stand, and she says, now, ladies, shall we lead the gentlemen to their port? And off they go into the drawing room, and the Queen Mother says, wouldn't it be funny if we all hid, so that when the men come out from the dining room, they come in here, they can't see us. They don't know where we've gone. And wouldn't that be fun? And so you go behind the curtain, I'll go behind the fire screen, you go under the piano. And so all the women just hid in the room, so they were completely invisible. So there's Martin stubbing out the cigar. Well, shall we join the ladies? Well, they all they all amble off. They all go into the drawing room, and there's the Queen Mother quivering behind the fire screen, terribly excited. And in comes Martin, looks around, and says, oh, thank God for that, they've all fucked off to bed. Anyway, there you are. Those are the repeatable ones.
Very good. Yes, indeed, they are. All right, I call this meeting to order. Tell us about the last time you were here. How did that all happen, and how was it for you?
It was a thrilling experience. You said to the audience, I know because I was listening, but when you introduced me, you mentioned that I'd written this book, Mythos, and in the intervening years, I'd also written a second one called Heroes, The first one, Mythos, was about the creation of the earth out of chaos, and the first gods and the Titans, and then the Olympian gods, and the creation of mankind. And it sort of finished with a few of the, what you grandly might call the etiological stories, the stories of how, like Rudyard Kipling's How the Elephant Got Its Trunk, you know, how the spider got to spin, and so on, and human beings who challenged the gods and were turned into animals and punished in different ways. And then the second one was called Heroes, and was about, you know, Heracles and Perseus and Jason and the Argonauts and all those wonderful heroes. And the third one was Troy, about the great fight, the 10-year fight for Helen of Troy. And the fourth one was the Odyssey, the return home of the heroes, particularly of course, Odysseus. Anyway, so you knew this. I think I hadn't written the Odyssey yet. I'd written the first three, had I?
I don't think you'd written Troy yet.
Oh, hadn't I even written Troy? No, you're quite right, I hadn't. I'd just written the first two. But I always felt that they were such wonderful stories, and that if there was a way of telling them and bringing them to life on stage, it would be fun. And as you said, we talked about it, and somehow the idea of doing a little season here, of combining the stories in an evening, arose. And it turned out to be 3 stories and 3 shows, didn't it? And it was a chair, a rather magical chair that rose out of the stage and did things, and it was pictures in the background, but it wasn't much more than that. And I knew nothing about Niagara-on-the-Lake. I knew nothing, and to my shame, I didn't know. I knew you'd taken on this job at the Shaw Theatre. And then I sort of looked up online, and I saw that it was a major theatre, and I could see that this was not, you know, going to be a small enterprise. And I arrived in March, I think it was. It was cold, you know, and as you know, one of the miracles of this town is how it transforms itself at springtime. The blossom down the main street is just exquisite. It's so beautiful. And as I got myself a little house, and walked to the theatre and we'd rehearse. And we had no idea what we were going to do, really. We just started by me sitting there and telling the stories, and slowly somehow you sculpted it, and we got the show. But it was how long was it? I don't know. I was here for 2 months, 3 months?
I think 3 in the end, with the rehearsals.
And it was in this theatre, and we had lovely audiences. They all came along and seemed to enjoy themselves and listening to me telling these stories. And I have still, you know, I still communicate with the odd person who wrote to me. Someone who wrote about their daughter saw it and decided to read classics, or as we say in England, to study classics at university. And I've followed this girl doing that, which is wonderful. And it just, we were talking about this, there was something about these stories. Every culture has its mythic cycles. The reason I chose the Greeks is because they were the ones I'd grown up with. And because in the Western tradition, they have entered our language in extraordinary ways. And of course, the history of Western art and poetry is filled with allusions to classical stories, and they remain central to our way of discussing ourselves. And, you know, I don't need to remind anyone that Christopher Nolan's film The Odyssey is coming out this year. It's going to be an enormous event. And this appetite for these stories seems to be still alive. And I had a wonderful time. I sort of mingled with the cast and company and went to see other shows and enjoyed the life Niagaran.
The life Niagaran. And we didn't actually come up with a script, did we?
No, there was no script. No, I just said it.
Yeah. Yes. And which is odd, because it's not like you're very good off the cuff.
Well, as I sort of explained, all I have, as W.H. Auden had, all I have is a voice. But I really enjoyed it. It was an extraordinary experience, because if you can do a show without a script, it keeps you very alive. I'm not sure I could do it if I didn't have a structure in my head. I knew what the structure was, and I knew the stories I wanted to tell. And And it just seemed to work. And after all, the thing I bore in mind is that wherever myth comes from, and it's a kind of mystery to some extent, and there are famous phrases people use for it, the collective unconscious, and Joseph Campbell called it public dreams. But there is this sense, but what I always think of is completely inaccurate, I'm sure, in terms of Paleolithic or any kind of anthropological truth. But you think of the cave, and there are the grunty men who are good at going off and killing animals. And there are the women who grow and look after the children, who grow the plants and put things together. And some of them may join the men, I don't know, but the men come back incredibly pleased with themselves with a goat or an elephant on their back. And then it gets cooked in the cave. And by this time, there is fire. And after the meal, everybody's sitting and patting their tummies. One or two out of that gene pool, because the people in the cave represent the human gene pool. So there are one or two who say, I'm going to do a drawing. And they go off and they do a drawing.
As camply as that?
As camply as that, yeah. And the children might say, one of them might say, Mummy or Daddy, why are we different from the animals? That's the first question you'd ask, because you can even ask the question. You've got language, and language has advanced the humans, and they can see that it's advanced them, because tenses, the fact that you can say future and past. So rather than, you couldn't do this with grunts, you could say, let's meet at that clearing with the big tree where we met when we killed the antelope. Let's meet there again in 2 sunsets' time. There's a plan. You can start doing things with language that you can't do in any other way. It's quite extraordinary. But also you can be aware that animals don't seem to have this. And so a child would see that we were animals. You can see that animals mate and eat and defecate, and we do those things, and we have the same impulses and needs. But we have this tool making and fire, and we've now got dogs looking after us and barking when someone comes, and we've got the. How did this happen? And one or two of the people in the cave, probably not the alpha males, but and maybe the brother or sister of the person doing the painting, says, well, there were these gods, and they made the world. And every single thing that is a force in the world that moves things, that makes things different, has to be explained. So if it's fire coming out of a mountain, which we would now call a volcano, then how do you explain it? There must be a god in there who makes the fire, and we'll call him Vulcan, which is why it's called a volcano, or Hephaestus if you're Greek. And what's the noise, the thunder, the strange thing that happens when it rains? There's a god who's either angry, but he's shaking the earth, and another one shakes the earth for earthquakes and causes tides. Another one, the force that moves a green shoot out of an almost dead twig on a tree every year must be another god. Until you can give them another name, photosynthesis or whatever, these are forces. And the Greeks were very good at recognizing that it's forces that make everything. In fact, there's a wonderful story to be had from one of the areas of Greece where, in Thessaly, there were these rocks, and they had some kind of quality in them. They had iron in them, but they had this other material that attracted iron. And so you could have a motion, a force, an action at a distance, which is the magical thing in all the world, an action at a distance. Let's say this is not at a distance, I'm lifting it. But if I could lift it without touching it, then it becomes sort of magic.
Or we have a much bigger budget for this show.
Yes, exactly. But you have to use something that causes action at a distance. And these stones were in an area called magnesia, so they were called magnetite. We called them magnets. But even more amazingly, the Greeks discovered that if you took a piece of amber and you rubbed it on a cloth, you could attract things again, like a magnet. So you had magnets and you had amber.
And what's the word for amber?
The Greek word for amber is electron. And so when people noticed and started trying to understand this force, they called it amberiness, which in Greek is electricity. And so you had electrics and you had magnets. And the miracle of the 19th century was the unifying of magnets and electricity into one force. And that's the God that rules our society. Electromagnetism rules it entirely. It's a remarkable God, and we know what things it can do in giving us light and communication and all kinds of things, both good and terrible. But so that idea to me of just asking questions about where things come from, what the force is, giving them names and ideas, Zeus or Jupiter, Sky Father, Jupiter, and the other thing that absolutely struck me, I'm not wishing to offend anyone of any particular religion, but to me, if you look at the world and you imagine there are gods or a God that created it, it seems to make sense to say, looking at the world, which is beautiful and majestic and strong and incredible and eternal, that maybe the gods who made it were beautiful and majestic and strong and eternal. But the world is also cruel and capricious, deeply unfair, full of misery and full of terrible things, as well as beautiful and noble things. So if there were a God, that God would be majestic and marvelous and all-knowing to some extent, but also cruel and unfair and mean and represent all the bad things in the world as well as all the good. You can't have both. And that's what I loved about the Greeks, is they gave their gods the full characteristics of the world in which they found themselves.
Yeah, they don't have the problem of evil that certain other religions...
No, that's right. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, you have to try and explain how a loving God can cause bone cancer in children.
You really do. Which brings me to the question, slightly roundabout way, but actually, those are the stories that you were telling in Mythos. Why didn't you just make a TV show of you telling those stories? What was the point of doing it live?
This moment we're having now, this interaction, although the audience is being very well behaved and quiet and not throwing things or joining in or shouting rubbish, is, as you know, as you can feel it, and I hope as the audience can feel it, has a reality and a truth to it and an excitement to it and an engagement to it that relates all the way back to telling stories in caves and is all the more valuable now as we face a tsunami. I picture the human family as sitting on a beach with its back to the sea, playing beach cricket or beach ice hockey or whatever you do. And not noticing what's happening behind them as different currents are converging. The currents of genomics, gene editing, robotics, bioaugmentation, bionics, if you want to call it that, brain-machine interfacing, which is growing and growing in such a way that your brain can control a computer, or that your computer can read your brain, can see the pictures that you are thinking. You can actually make a picture come up on the screen. These are all developing at a very fast rate. And new materials, graphene and so on, Buckminster fullerene, and all these extraordinary and amazing nanotubes and nanomaterials and extraordinary things that could be done with them. And of course, on top of that, robotics and artificial intelligence. And I've been interested in artificial intelligence anyway, they are building into a tsunami is the point. And we're really, yes, we're talking about it, but we're not really preparing, we're not running for the hills. And I got interested in AI in the 1980s, which was the middle of what is known as the artificial intelligence winter, the AI winter. And I got to know this man called Marvin Minsky, who was the man who coined the phrase artificial intelligence, because it's not as natural as it may seem. You're going to call it something. Can machines think? Turing had asked this question about thinking machines in the early 50s. Then he died, and in kind of almost in his honor and to take up his work on thinking machines, Marvin Minsky and others formed the AI lab at MIT in Cambridge, in Boston, America, Massachusetts. And they worked on all kinds of extraordinary ideas, brilliant. They were no cleverer than the people working on it now, but they didn't have one thing that people had 10 years ago as it started to develop, and that is data. Because if you had an artificial intelligent machine and you wanted it to know the works of Shakespeare, up until about, it's certainly quite recently, you would have to type the works of Shakespeare into the machine. There's no other way it could know it. And a thing called Moore's Law was in operation. In the early 1960s, Gordon Moore, who was one of the early people to work with William Shockley, who won the Nobel Prize for inventing the transistor, they all went off to Palo Alto, California, only because, incidentally, that's where William Shockley was born. It was his hometown, and he'd left the East Coast where he'd invented it, the Bell Labs, and he'd gone to Palo Alto in the Santa Clara Valley, which became known as the Silicon Valley, because they discovered that the best medium for their transistors was silicon, as we know. And he eventually fitted 2 onto a chip. And then later on he could fit 4 on. And he proposed a law. He said, I think every 18 months or so we could double the number of transistors we can fit on a chip. Transistor being the thing that enables the current to switch. And this Moore's Law has held, and the effect of it is quite astounding, because it's exponential, exactly. I'm sure you know the story of the rice on the chessboard. You know that a bored sultan said, invent me a game and I will give you whatever you want if it is, if I don't get bored with it. And all these people, wise people, invented various games. And he went round looking at them all, and none of them were pleased. Some of them had mechanical elephants in them, and some of them were very elaborate. And then he came across this very simple one with an 8x8 black and white square and these little pieces on it. And the man explained what it was, and he said this is the Shah, because obviously Shah is king in Persian, as in the Shah of Iran, and the Shah, and you have to kill the king, and you do these moves, and when the king he has to be king, you shout, the king is dead, which in Persian is Shachmat, checkmate. And so he explained the game, and actually the Sultan adored it and said, you can have whatever you want. And the inventor said, well, I needs a few. Just pop a grain of rice on one of the squares, and then on the square next to it 2, and then the square next to that 4, and the square next to that 8, and then cover the board. And the Sultan thinks, well, that was easy, and he calls for a sack of rice and goes off, and then his vizier comes to see him after a while and says, there is a problem. He said, what's that? He said, well, we've just done 2 rows, and I have calculated that when we get to the 3rd row, by then there will be more rice required than there is in the kingdom, and then for the next, there's 2 rows after that, more rice than has ever been grown in the history of mankind. And this is true. It is extraordinary what happens when you double and double and double and double. 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256.
It starts slowly, doesn't it?
And then bang.
You think, we're okay.
Yeah, and then it's just... And that's what's happened. You now fit billions, hundreds of billions of transistors into the same space. Before you could just fit 1. Hundreds of billions. And this has caused the power, the extraordinary power in computers. And of course, it's not just the computer you have at home or in the office, it's the computers that run everything, the servers. A server is a computer. Don't think of it as anything else. The cloud. The cloud is somebody else's computer. It just doesn't have a keyboard. The keyboard is just for humans to use. It doesn't have a screen, but it's a computer. It uses the chips. And the chips are now so powerful and so fast, and the storage capacity that goes with it is so great. Those of you who remember the early days of Twitter and Facebook, the server was always going down, and you could, people's websites would freeze because 20 people were using them at once. But there's, double. There was 1998, the US invested in the most powerful computer in the world. It was called the something red, became with A, not the Altair red, but something red. And it was extraordinarily powerful. But by 2006, that same computing power was in the PlayStation 3, that was in the average, So that's how much it, and then the year after that, it had doubled. And then the year after that, it had doubled. So what was already powerful was doubling. And this meant that all the data in the world was stored around the world on servers. Everything that human beings had communicated and said and done, some of it obviously encrypted and private, as it should be, but much of it just simply all the information in the world. All the information on Wikipedia alone is pretty good, but there was everything. And so once you had a web crawler, a thing that could crawl for this data, once you had a system of a neural network and you'd started to imagine these layers and layers in artificial intelligence, you could have machines that had fast access to all the information in the world. Then you had to find a way of allowing it to present it to a human so it was useful. Because what computers can do better than any of us is sort, ordinate, store, retrieve, and present information. That information can be pixels, so it can be a picture, which we call generative AI, or it can be information that is useful to you. And they do it by being able to reproduce strings of language according to Bayesian probability, as it's called, stochastic parrots, somebody called them. But anyway, we've seen what the effect is. It's jolly impressive. But it's worth remembering that it may be impressive now. I was used to use the image of a car. If you were, people, I still hear people saying, yeah, it's all right, artificial intelligence, but it makes all those mistakes. And I say, well, imagine you're in Mannheim in 1885 and you're in the garage of a Mr. Bentz, Carl Bentz, who says, I want you to see what I have invented. And he's got this little stuttering, farting little machine with sort of oily smell bouncing up and down, and he sits in it, and it's a converted cart, essentially, and he sort of operates some levers, and it goes forward on its own, powered by pistons of exploding petrol vapor, and you see it go forward, and you think, well, that's not going to replace the horse. That's the infrastructure of coaching stables and water troughs and food and hay and this needs, what is it you called it again? Petrol? Where does that come from? Because at that point, Rockefeller and others hadn't really cracked the hydrocarbon chains in order to be able to refine and produce petrol at a massive rate. And it's a similar thing with the AI winter, that yes, you could have an intelligent machine, but it didn't have the fuel, it didn't have the data. And now it does have the data, and it's starting to move. But you would have said in 1885, there isn't, nobody looking at that prototype by Carl Bentz in Mannheim would have said, I foresee motorways, I foresee interstate highways of incredible width. I see parking structures in every town. I see in whole communities which are based on these motor cars. You just say, go away, And yet, as we know, that's what happened over a period of time with the motor car. And so look at AI now. It is nothing to what it's going to be, because it has all kinds of advantages over other technologies in speeding itself up. One of which, of course, is it can use itself to improve itself. Its coding ability, it has access to all the codes on GitHub and everywhere else, and tens of billions of lines of code that it can, so it can code itself, and is starting to do so, as we know, both deliberately as the engineers do it, and of its own volition, it would seem, if the word volition has any value. Whether it presents a threat or the greatest promise to humanity that has ever been seen, it requires us to remember that it's actually not about the technology, it's about humanity. When Gutenberg in 1450 produced the first Bible by mechanical print, it was an extraordinary moment for humanity, absolutely extraordinary. But it has to be remembered that the printing press has no moral valency. It is, the same printing press can print today the complete works of John Keats, all his poems, and the next day it can print Mein Kampf. It doesn't know the difference. And it's the same with AI. It doesn't have any moral valency at all. Only the humans who operate it have. And when nuclear power came, probably the greatest, before AI, the most important and significant technology that had come, or the most possibly dangerous, when that came, Johannes von Neumann was appointed head of the Atomic Energy Committee, the man that Einstein called the greatest scientist who has ever lived. A genius from Hungary and an incredible man. He was put in charge of it, and institutions were built up, NATO and so on. But there was the world, obviously, all the United Nations, the European market was coming. All these different institutions were built up to try and stop another war and to make sure that this terrifying power was under the control properly of the people who understood it and who could, use it. We are now living in an age in which the people who run the world don't believe in institutions. Fortunately, Mark Carney does, and he made that brilliant speech the other week, and bless him for it. Absolutely. But we know that Trump and Putin and Xi and Modi and Orban and Milei and Meloni and Lukashenko and all the other tyrants and populists in the world now don't believe in the United Nations, don't believe in NATO, don't believe in any of these institutions whatsoever. And the other thing we have to remember is that AI is entirely in the control of the same people who brought us social media. The same people who saw that social media was harmful, who had it proved time and time again that it was essentially a form of pollution, and that children are breathing in or swimming in rivers of discourse or breathing in, as it were, contaminants from the internet constantly, all the time, breathing them in. And when there are known dangers, normally in industry there is legislation. You can't pump this out. But no, this is apparently an attack on free speech, and the tech brats who run everything make sure that they control, because they control all courses of information, that they essentially control politicians enough. There are unlikely to be many politicians likely to be voted in power in America or in other countries without the permission of people like Musk and Zuckerberg. And that's what's terrifying, not the technology, but in whose hands it is. It's the 3 C's. Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
yeah.
So how quixotic an activity is this? Getting together in a theatre and breathing the same air.
That's really what I was trying to come around to. You're right. I just finished a 4-month run of The Importance of Being Earnest in London. Having talked about it, I never dreamed I would... I was playing Lady Bracknell, and it was an incredible experience. But one of the things I would talk to with the audiences afterwards and so on the odd events we occasionally do around with schools and things, is the extra power and magic that theatre seems to reverberate with in an age of AI slop and of untrustworthy images and of endless streaming and endless digital exposure to figures on a screen that you can no longer trust are real, no longer have any of the grain and juice of a human interaction of the kind we've evolved to thrive with. And theatre is the one thing left that only works as theatre although some directors try and introduce too much video. But essentially, standing on a stage, you see the spittle coming out of the mouth, you hear occasionally a mistake, or occasionally the actor will make each other giggle. There's a tension, an excitement, a thrill that each night something is being made, not just by the actors, but by the combination of an actor, a group of actors, and an audience together, make an evening together. And the Greeks were right to think of it as an almost religious celebration to do this. There's something sacred and ritualistic and wonderful about it. You don't have to dive into it intellectually or get over pretentious about it. It's just something you feel. It's real. And sometimes it's not good, or sometimes you don't like it. I didn't like that play, I didn't like that performance. So you can talk about it, but it is not being handed down to you by a Silicon Valley billionaire or a politician or a big corporation. It is, particularly in this wonderful place, it is local. It is something that belongs to Niagara-on-the-Lake, belongs to Canada, belongs to you all because you've come here to support it. It is a magical and powerful thing, and God bless it, and don't let it die.
I've only got a couple more questions for you, and because we're going to wrap up soon. First of all, of course, and it will seem like a jump, but it really isn't, because this is kind of what we're talking about. Julie Andrews and the Eclipse.
Well, I can tell two Julie Andrews stories. I'll tell the Eclipse first, then I'll tell the second one,
All right.
where I saved her honour, I like to think. I was in the Isle of Man some decades ago making a film, and Julie Andrews was the star. It was an adaptation of a Noel Coward play called Relative Values, and I was in it, and Colin Firth and Billy...
Whitelaw?
No. As in the brothers, Baldwin, William Baldwin, yeah. Billy Baldwin, nice chap. His brother keeps shooting people, so that's
Allegedly.
Yes. No, really.
Oh, no,
he
that's
actually
right.
did.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Not deliberately, though, obviously. Anyway, it was a lovely company, a lovely cast, and we were on the Isle of Man. And it was around the time there was a total eclipse available for Western Europe. So we were given the morning off to go up and inspect it and watch the world go dark. And so Julie and the rest of us went up this very, very green hill. And we've been issued with little bits of smoked glass to look at it for. You always get warnings about not looking at the sun. And we went up on this hill, and we could see the moon beginning to get close. Oh, it's getting close, it's getting to the edge. And then there was a group of Manx people, as people from the Isle of Man are called, and they saw Julie Andrews. And suddenly the sun and the moon weren't very interesting. And they sort of started edging towards it, and I said, Julie, I said, you're distracting everybody. And she said, so she got up, and on this green hill, and then she pointed at them and said, now.
And when Mary Poppins tells you to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Or rather, yes.
Or Sister Watson.
Maria. Yeah. There was an occasion that we were filming in this big country house, and the upstairs bits were used as our dressing rooms. And I was in mine one lunchtime, having my lunch, and there was a television on a table there, and I looked, and there was a news story, and I suddenly perked up because in the lunch news they were reporting that there was a new season of not karaoke exactly, what do you call it, but a sing-along version of The Sound of Music, the actual film, but with the titles and the bouncing ball going along. And they had a news team out there to show everybody arriving for the first night of it, and everyone was dressed as a Nazi or a nun. There was one young man, elegant young man, entirely in very tight gold spandex. And the BBC had sent Graham Norton to do a little report on it. And Graham Norton looked at him and said, well, I can see the nuns, I can see the Nazis, but what have you come at? And the man looked at Graham as if he was an idiot and said, "I'm Ray, a drop of golden sun." Then Graham, and I don't know what possessed him, and it's not typical of him. It was some time ago, and he wasn't the great star that he is now in terms of talk shows and things. But he did a piece with the news reporter, throwing back and forth between themselves about the event, and she was asking why he thought this film was still so important to so many people. And he said, obviously Julie Andrews is not the greatest actress in the world, and I thought, that was cruel. And then he goes on about why the film is good. So I thought, thank goodness she didn't see that. In the evening, I throw a little party, as I do most evenings, in my dressing room. People come along and have a drink and nibble or whatever. And so they were in the dressing room, and the evening news is on the television. And I suddenly see they're repeating the story, the whole same identical story. And someone points, says, "Oh, look, Julie, it's about The Sound of Music." And she goes, "Oh." She starts to look, and there's Ray, the drop of golden sun, and I see the bit coming up, and I think, "Oh, Jesus, she cannot." So in those days, I was a smoker, and I can see the news reporter beginning to ask Graham Norton why he thinks The Sound of Music is such a great, lasting cult film. And I throw my lit cigarette into the bin that's under the table where the thing is, and I go, oh my God, it's going to catch fire. So there's the television. I stand in front of it going, "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, sorry." And Julie's going, "Stephen, get out of the way." I'm going, "Oh, there we go. Phew." And it's over, and she never heard it.
Pretty cool. That's sort of James Bond of tact. That's marvellous. The reason I wanted you to tell the Julie Andrews story, of course, is because, as I mentioned right at the beginning of this, when you told it me, we said something like, "Oh, and it's a shame nobody filmed it." And then we both stopped and said, "But actually, you know what?
Yeah, it's good.
It is better, isn't it?
Yeah,
I would much rather hear you tell the story, frankly, than see some person's film made like that where you go, "Oh, that must have been nice to be there," but..."
Yeah, I know what you mean. It is extraordinary going to events where you see people just doing that. And it's doubly stupid because they'll never actually look back at what they filmed.
Of course not.
They might post it, but it's of no use to
No,
them
they
at
make
all.
their friends watch it, but they don't want to watch it. Look, we're out of time, but I just want to really sort of take that as the final thought, that we are really blessed in you. We're blessed to have someone who can conjure up a scene. We'll all remember that Julie Andrews dancing on the top of a hill on the Isle of Man, much more vividly in a way than certainly if we'd seen someone on YouTube, and in a different way than if we'd been there, because now it's been mediated through art and through storytelling. And that is what we do here. We've been very blessed to have you here again. I'd like to think there's a chance we might tempt you here again one day. What do you think?
Oh. Well, that's very kind. Thank you. Bless you. Bless you. It's becoming a second home. You're absolutely right.
So that's a yes. Hooray, ladies and gentlemen. Hooray.
I can't tell you when exactly, but yes. No,
Very
I'd love
good.
to. I'd love to be back here. It's lovely.
All right, I'm going to get out of the way so that you can applaud our dear friend Stephen Fry.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you very much. Whoa. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bless you. Bless you. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Oh, stop. You're too kind. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you.
A special thank you to Corey McFadyen and Caitlin McKinnon for recording this live event.
Thank you to TC and especially to Stephen Fry for coming all the way to the Shaw Festival and joining us. And thank you, as always, for listening. If you have questions, thoughts, or just want to say hello, drop us a line at podcast@shawfest.com.
Let's Get This Shaw on the Road is hosted by Alexis Milligan and produced by me, Kelly Wong. Original music by Travis Cito. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review.
Next week, we will step into the dark and ominous world of Amadeus.
Let's get this show on the